is consider a 10 to 15% across the board cut, but it doesn't stop there. And let me say, as a naval officer who's been in uniform for 2.5 decades, that those cuts also have to come in the form of the military. Not the defense, but the military. We still need to take care of our veterans. We don't have to lay off a bunch of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines and take away their ships and tanks. But the vast military complex that I have personally worked with as a member of the Pentagon, where 6 out of 10 of the biggest consulting groups to the Pentagon are foreign-owned companies, there's massive waste there as well. And anyone who's in uniform can tell you that same thing. But across the board, government needs to be cut. We need to try to get to $1 trillion, but at a minimum 10 to 15%, and then grow ourselves out of the economy with a plan to stimulate business.
Would it be a fair statement to say, to follow up, that tax increases are off the table?
We don't have a problem with taxes being too low. We have a problem with not enough people paying taxes. I mean, the top 1% of Americans pay 40% of all taxes, and half of Americans don't pay any. So what we need to do is have a rising tide lift all boats. We've got to create opportunity, jobs, and wealth, prosperity for the lower and middle class, and come up with ways to stimulate the economy by having large companies and other organizations invest in to the infrastructure of America. I think the best way to do that I spelled out in Fargo last month with my comprehensive national energy plan, and I hope we can talk about that tonight.
This issue came up in the House debate, and it's from the audience. Are you willing to go to work in Washington and not take a retirement or pension?
Absolutely. Now, for full disclosure, I will have a retirement as a naval officer. But I think that my grandpa Wheeler in Lisbon, North Dakota, taught me that when you accepted a job in government, at any level of government, you were accepting a job that was probably going to pay less, that you might have to work a little bit longer, but that you're always going to have a paycheck. We've turned the tables in the last couple of decades, where we have government people not just expecting more than the taxpayers who are supporting them, but demanding it through public employee unions and other mechanisms, such that we have public servants in North Dakota in K through 12 who make 5 times the average median income of the taxpayers who hired them to do their job. The whole system needs to be revised, and that is a major issue that needs to be addressed both at the local and state level as well, not just at the federal level.
Since you brought up energy policy, you received a lot of ink when you suggested that maybe North Dakota could be the host for a nuclear power plant.
Yes.
Would you expand on that, and is that a realistic thing?
In just 1 minute?
Try to limit you to 2 minutes, I know.
I've worked for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I've spent years aboard nuclear submarines, traveling to 41 different countries around this globe. I can tell you that over 1/3 of the nuclear power plants that are providing 20+% of all the domestic electrical energy needs we need in this country are going to have to be completely shut down and decommissioned within 17 to 20 years. We're already building the first new 3rd-generation nuclear power plants in 30 years in America, right now, today, in Vogel, Georgia. Regardless of if we build them in North Dakota or not, they're going to get built. And the things we've learned over the last 30 years, since 3 Mile Island, since Fukushima, has been that we need seismically stable land. And in North Dakota, and particularly eastern North Dakota, is the most seismic stable land in all of North America. It's close to the grid, it's close to an adequate water supply, and it's a way of generating even more jobs and opportunity in North Dakota so that our kids and grandkids, for 60 years down the road, have an opportunity to get a really well-paying job here in North Dakota. It's entirely feasible. We should seriously consider it, because it is a solution to not just providing opportunity and electricity to North Dakotans, but it's an opportunity to provide much-needed electricity to the rest of the nation and to the northeastern grid.
Next two questions are going to be from audience and also from emails I received. This one I received from an email. You've run for office 4 times now. What is it about being in Washington, D.C. that holds such great appeal?
You know, I don't look forward to going to Washington, D.C. I went to college in Annapolis, Maryland, just down the road from Washington, D.C. I worked in the Pentagon for 3 years. When I came back from the Iraq War, I was made a presidential appointment by President Bush to the Department of Defense in the Pentagon. The traffic's bad, the weather in the summer stinks. But let me tell you something. I was also instilled, not just me, but all of my classmates at the Naval Academy, with the idea that if you have the ability to make a difference for your country, then you have an obligation. Washington is so absolutely messed up. You know, I tell this story and most people are just completely surprised. 30, 40 years ago, over 60% of Congress was made up of veterans, proven leaders. Now, over 60% of Congress is made up of lawyers. Let me say to my Republican friends, the last thing our country needs, and the last thing we need to do from North Dakota, send another lawyer to Washington, D.C. So, I think I can go there. I know I'm disciplined and I've proven that with the Americans for Prosperity, North Dakota Taxpayers Association, Ed Schaefer and I leading an effort to cut income and personal income taxes and corporate taxes. I'm not going to go there and start doing the Potomac two-step and start voting for ridiculous debt ceiling limit increases as my opponent has done.
The other questions from the audience tonight. Would you vote to end the Federal Reserve?
I don't think you can, I think ultimately that would be a great thing to work for and strive for, but that's not going to happen anytime in my lifetime, I don't think. I can tell you what, we seriously need to rein in the Federal Reserve. We need a full and transparent audit of the Federal Reserve. Our Republicans and Democrats in Washington are resisting this, and I don't understand it. The Federal Reserve has created a terrible environment with which the people of America have relied on them to help avoid. And their power is unrestrained. There are no checks and balances. They need to be brought under control. Ultimately, it would be a great goal to achieve, but in the interim, we're going to have to seriously take a look at what they're doing, audit, and make them accountable to the American people, the taxpayers.
Concerning health care reform, what is your stand on the current health care reform bill that was passed? Should it be completely overhauled? Are there parts of it that are good? What do you think?
It should be completely thrown out. I mean, this is a health care bill that was passed by a committee where the committee chairman said he didn't understand it, by a Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who says you can't read what's in it until you pass it. There require 90,000 IRS agents, new IRS agents, to implement it, and is already driven up costs for the hardworking people of our country. It needs to be completely overhauled. Now, are there other things we should and could be doing? Absolutely. Portability in healthcare policies, competition across state lines. I built and owned and operated and now have sold a small 5,000 square foot restaurant. We did not have the ability to even consider health care coverage for our workers because we couldn't pool those workers into a group and get a lower rate. There are serious things we can do, we should do, and I will fight to do when I get to Washington.
Also, what do you think of a flat tax?
You know, I heard the discussion of the House candidates, and I agree with much of them, but I got to tell you that, and I certainly support revising the current tax structure. But I really truly believe that if we're going to bring prosperity to our country and then help to stimulate the economy, that if we could shift our taxes, which are now on productivity, to a tax on consumption, then those who are using the most in the country will pay the most. Ultimately, I don't think that the people of, I'm certain the people of America don't support keeping the tax brackets and structure the way we are right now. It's burdensome, it costs more money, billions of dollars just to implement. If we had a flat tax, I would support it. And if we had a movement to go towards a consumption tax and eliminate the productivity tax, I would support that as well.
I'd also like to just briefly get into the Roe v. Wade issue that we brought up during the House debate. Should the Senate, or is there a way the Senate can do something to overturn it if you do not support Roe v. Wade, or do you support Roe v. Wade?
Well, I am and always have been 100% pro-life. I'm 100% pro-life. I'm 100% for traditional marriage between a man and a woman. I don't think that there's a candidate in this state, I hope not even on the Democrat side, who is not supportive of both of those.
I will ask this question then. Has anyone been keeping the track of the number of questions I've asked?
About 100.
Okay. I have a good track record.
Say 6.
Well, what will it take for you to close the deal with voters? I ask that because you're running against Rick Byrd, and you have to get the nomination first. And what do you need to do to close the deal with voters?
Well, I need to communicate them. That's why I'm here tonight. That's why I'll be at the next debate in February. It's why that I'm traveling the state so much, because I really do believe that the people of North Dakota deserve to hear what the candidates think. I've run several times. It inspires me to see 6 candidates for the U.S. House sitting up here earlier tonight. I can remember as a candidate in years like 2008 and 4, running against entrenched incumbents with millions of dollars, that there wasn't so much enthusiasm about running for office. But I did it because it was the right thing to do, and I think the people of North Dakota deserve to hear the other side of the story. But as we all know, incumbents in Washington are reelected in every state, on average, 96% of the time. I've debated the Democrats on the left from North Dakota. I know how they think, I know how they debate, and I also know that, as most Americans do, that any time you put a moderate against a liberal, more often than not, the moderate loses, the liberal wins. North Dakotans want to hear all the answers to all the questions they ask the candidates. They want to hear the difference between policies, not muddled in between with rhetoric and fancy slogans. And I believe that when I win the primary or convention, whichever it takes, that we will prevail against Heidi Heitkamp in November.
Okay, you did mention either. So if you do not get the endorsement at the convention, you are considering the primary?
Well, I've said publicly that I believe that I can win the convention, and if I win, that Rick will go to the primary. But I haven't ruled out going to the primary myself. I think there's going to be a primary fight for the U.S. Senate race on the Republican side. But I think it's going to be Rick challenging me because he's not going to like the results of the convention. And here's the logic behind that. Rick is going to have to go before all the delegates in March here in Bismarck and explain why he voted to add $10 trillion to the U.S. debt in that Budget Control Act. And just 2 days ago, it's quite remarkable, he voted for a resolution opposing an increase in the debt limit, when in August he voted to increase the debt limit. That's the kind of games so many North Dakotans I talk to across the state are so sick of. And, he's going to have to explain why he voted against cutting the budget of the EPA and Amtrak, and why he's touting a balanced budget amendment and cutting spending, but yet he's signing off on press releases with Camp Conrad for all kinds of projects coming into the state, and discretionary money that we don't have, that we have to borrow, and that our kids and grandkids are going to have to pay back if we don't fix it.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to answer the questions, even though I fired about 300 actually.